Thank you all for coming. I'm Kate Cost, Chair of the Community Policing Advisory Review Board, and on behalf of the board, I want to welcome you to our second Public Safety Education Forum. One of the challenges of this time is to, among many, is to identify our common interest in equity in the application of crime prevention to meet our collective need for safety. The role of sentencing within the legal system of justice is a key component of this effort. It is our hope that you'll come away from tonight's event with a greater understanding of the work these public and nonprofit professionals do to achieve that end. With that, I'd like to introduce the members of CPARB that are here tonight. Jeff Vickers is our vice chair, and Scott Frost, who handed out your program. Now we'll move to the biographies of and introduce our panelists.
Okay. So Ralph Bennett is the Director of Recovery, Housing, and Corrections at Turning Point of Bennington. He is a certified recovery coach and has worked out of the emergency department at SPMC doing assessments for substance use disorder. He currently directs Turning Point's programs at probation and parole. Turning Point has 2 90-minute substance use disorder groups a week for men and 4 90-minute groups for women. They do an individual coaching with the population. Turning Point recently opened their first recovery residence. This is for men who need a place to start their journey into recovery. Residents are referred from inpatient facilities and correctional centers. They are able to stay at the recovery residence for up to 1 year. Next is Frederick Bragdon. He has been a co-supervising attorney in the Bennington County Public Defender's Office since 1998. Prior to coming to Vermont, he was an assistant public defender in Dade County, Miami, Florida, from August 1984 to December 1997. Next is Letha Cipriano, and that is, she's the Executive Director of the Center for Restorative Justice, also known as CRJ, for over 20 years. She has been instrumental in leading CRJ from a small agency with 2 programs into the first full-service community justice agency in the state of Vermont. CRJ now offers over 14 different programs to residents of Bennington County, serving over 1,500 people a year. CRJ programs are based on the principles of restorative justice, a philosophy of justice that holds people who have caused harm accountable to their victims and the community. Letha is an active member on numerous committees, including several state-level committees, helping impart restorative practices throughout Vermont systems and agencies. Letha and her husband live in Wilmington and have 2 adult children and 3 little grandchildren. Next is Gina Kondo, currently serves as the District Manager for the Bennington Office of Probation and Parole in the Vermont Department of Corrections. In addition to supervising individuals on probation and parole, she has collaborated with local recovery agencies and law enforcement and has participated in professional workshops discussing effective intervention and recovery programs. Next is Robert Plunkett, is a senator for the Bennington Senate District, taking office on January 9th, 2025. He is the vice chair of the Senate Committee on Institutions and serves on the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee. Senator Plunkett also serves on the Senate Committee on Agriculture, the Canvassing Committee, and the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. He is chair of the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee, and he has been a prosecutor at the Bennington County State's Attorney's Office since 2007. Senator Plunkett was raised and educated in Bennington and is a 1993 graduate of Mount Anthony Union High School. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Amherst College in 1998 and graduated from Brooklyn Law School in 2006 with his JD. Dr. Al Yariv has been serving as Medical Director of the United Counseling Service, UCS, since 2015 and is responsible for overseeing clinical psychiatric services and providing guidance to the clinical staff. The medical director assures the agency patients receive appropriate evaluation, diagnosis, treatment, medical screening, and medical or psychiatric evaluation. In addition, the medical director is a liaison for UCS with community physicians, hospital staff, and other professionals and agencies associated with psychiatric services. Dr. Reeve earned her MPH at the University of New Mexico and served in multiple professional and academic roles at the University of New Mexico, Department of Psychiatry, Neurology, and Pediatrics. She earned her MD from the University of Connecticut School of Medicine with residencies in psychiatric at the Dartmouth School of Medicine and the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. She also has a BA in French and zoology from Connecticut College. She has spent time as the registrar in the epilepsy unit at the Institute of Psychiatric, and I might not say this right, Maudsley Hospital in London, UK, thank you, and was a fellow in the Clinical Brain Disorders Branch at the National Institutes of Mental Health in Washington, D.C.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
What we'd like to do right now is tell you a little bit about CPARB, the Community Policing Advisory Review Board. According to the Department of Justice, community policing is about strengthening the relationship between the community and local law enforcement. It's about collaboration based on mutual trust with the common goal of ensuring public safety. Community policing is a philosophy and practice that is uniquely suited to our common interest in safe and equitable crime prevention, as it seeks to collaborate with, rather than control, the actions of community members in securing safety for all members of the community. A great example of this are recent efforts by officers at BPD in collaboration with staff from UCS, Turning Point, Homeless Coalition, and others to move homeless individuals who like to hang out on the Riverwalk. Maybe you've seen them if you're a walker. They're usually at one end or the other, but they try to move these individuals who hang out on the Riverwalk away from the walk and help them obtain services. They do this routinely. They're not every day, but often enough that the size of that group has decreased over time. I remember walking to the Y one morning, there must have been 10 folks at the end of it on School Street, which is owned by the Willemsek, by the Housing Authority. And by the end of that week, they had moved to the public space, and then they were no longer there at all. So they still are, now they were back today. So this group of, this kind of team of providers and practitioners, I'm sure will go back there again and see if they connect folks to services. But that's the kind of collaboration, that's the kind of mutual support that they're giving to that marginalized group as well as to the residents at the Willemsek apartments. It increases the safety of all parties in that sense. In creating CPARB in spring 2022, the Select Board charged it with several goals. And so in addition to analyzing community-level data and state data to identify trends and patterns in crime prevention, CPARB was also charged with making recommendations and reviewing both the policies of the department as well as collaboration efforts within the community so that all voices can be heard. To achieve this, we've held 11 small group listening sessions with residents throughout the community and staff from nonprofit human service organizations. We continue to reach out to organizations. Some are interested in talking to us. Others, I have to admit, just ghost us. They never reply, and that's their choice. That's what they can do. Regardless, we continue to seek opportunities to engage members of the community. We also hold large group forums like this one to achieve another goal that charges us with promoting learning on community safety and equity issues. These forums give members of CPARB and the community the opportunity to not only improve our collective understanding about efforts to ensure legal equitable and safe crime prevention and law enforcement, but also to ask questions about these efforts and make suggestions that can improve those efforts. Our first forum, held in February 2025, focused on providing an overview of the factors that increase community-level violence and the crime prevention strategies used in Vermont and specifically in Bennington. This second forum is the result of recommendations from that one to hold an educational forum on sentencing. So to that end, we brought together members of the legislature and public and nonprofit professionals in Bennington to achieve a successful outcome for offenders that furthers our collective efforts in safety and crime prevention. Through the information gained from tonight's panel, it's our expectation that you will learn about the various roles played by these practitioners and the resources they can provide in the successful completion of sentencing as detailed in court orders in Bennington. Finally, we hope tonight's forum will help foster a sense of belonging and give you an opportunity to have your voices heard and your questions answered. Now we'll move to our panel and address the three issues identified in your program. We've allowed 20 minutes for each issue. Please hold your questions till the end. However, if a speaker is using an acronym or a term you're not familiar with, please come up to the microphone and you'll be able to ask for clarification. Okay, so with that, we'll begin. Our first issue is to provide an overview of the factors in sentencing that influence crime prevention strategies in Vermont. And I've got I haven't chosen anybody to start us off. So unless you want me to pick you, which I can do, I'd like someone to start us off on that, and we'll have a general discussion on that. Anybody want to start?
Wants to go first. I think it makes sense.
We look in the same
us
book.
to start. Yeah, we look in the same book.
Half of it for me.
So,
But that's good.
okay. So I'm Rob Plunkett. My placard says that I'm a state senator and state's attorney. I'm not the state's attorney. I'm a deputy state's attorney, and I'm here just in terms of my experience as a prosecutor. So I want to make sure it's clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of the state's attorney in terms of policy or anything. But I can try to answer this question, which is a very broad question. So an overview of the factors in sentencing. So there's that. And then that influence crime prevention strategies in Vermont, which is a trickier clause to all of this. So what I did in my little bit of preparation was I brought a prop. And this is Title 13. This is the criminal law in the state of Vermont. This is basically all of the criminal law in the state of Vermont. It goes into some of the other books, but mostly it's here. And under statute, there are actually factors in sentencing. And I assume everyone knows how you get to sentencing. Essentially, someone's found guilty, and then the judge decides what sentence that they're going to get. There are different ways to get to the judge making that decision, but that's essentially how it works. And so this is Title 13, Section 730, subsection A. And I'll just read it. In determining which of the following should be ordered, which is, which of the following potential types of sentences, the court shall consider the nature and circumstances of the crime, the history and character of the defendant, the need for treatment, the risk to self, others, and the community at large presented by the defendant. So essentially, this is everything you could possibly think of in terms of a sentence is what the judge has to consider. It does start off with the crime itself, but then it moves on to considering what the defendant, what his background is, what they have done in the past, and perhaps if this is her first time coming before the court. The third factor being the need for treatment is fairly significant because I want to say that in terms of, and Frederick can correct me if he disagrees with me, is that much of what we do in the courts is we come up with agreements and we think about rehabilitation for the defendant. Most of the crimes that we have are relatively low level. and we think about what is going to help this person prevent them from doing it the next time. And it was funny because before we started this, I was talking to everyone except for Dr. Reeve about how they don't have any answer to the first question because they're not part of sentencing. But for me, these folks are actually deeply involved in what sentences we either might ask for or agree to. So what programs the Department of Corrections can provide, whether there's even literally room in the jail. Turning point being the focus of substance abuse. Well, I'll let you speak to what it is. I'm going to say treatment, but it's broader and different from that. And quite frankly, most of the crimes that we deal with have some substance abuse component. And CRJ is something where, you know what if we don't want to sentence this person? We can have Letha take them on, and UCS is when we're talking about mental health components and substance abuse components, obviously, as well. But these are all of the things that go into considering how a sentence is going to be fashioned. And it's either the two sides say, here, judge, this is what we think is the proper sentence, and the judge considers it and then issues the sentence, and that usually is by agreement, and the judge doesn't overturn that agreement. Or if there's argument, and the judge decides on their own. And in terms of how these things influence crime prevention strategies, quite frankly, I don't know. The reasons for sentencing are multifactored, and there's many court decisions on this. And one of them is obviously just deterrence. And that's deterring the particular defendant or the public at large. There's also, as I mentioned, rehabilitation. There's also just plain old punishment. You're going to punish this person in some fashion for what they've done. And those are the goals of every sentence, and every sentence to some degree has a role in crime prevention. But I do have to say that in my experience, about 18 years as a prosecutor, each and every sentence has more to do with that particular case, and it doesn't fall into any sort of cookie cutter. We do have the parameters that the legislature has given. And those are usually maximum sentences, but that's really it. We really look into what has happened, what has this person done, and what does this person deserve in many different ways. So that's just sort of my basic, this is the legal answer to what the factors go into it. But I'm interested in hearing from the others in what they can provide in terms of helping with the sentences and what factors they think we should put into before we essentially send them all to you folks.
Let me put just a slightly different spin or organize it a different way. So I went to the same prop as Robert, and to say the same statement up front. I don't represent the Defender General's office. I represent a person with an awful lot of state criminal defense experience. So understand that. I have the same thing already checked off, Section 730. Those are the factors the judge is supposed to consider. But there's older school stuff, and you'll hear some of the older judges, which are getting fewer these days. They organize it a different way. Retribution. Someone was harmed here. What kind of harm should the person who harmed them get? Think of your child. You're going to use your words. You're going to spank them in the old school. What is it going to be? That is a very individual response. In other words, you're looking at the individual who is harmed. Criminal law as a general theory is not about the individual. It's a harm against the state, and the state is a group of individuals. So the law over time looks at both the, let me see if I can do this a different way. We talk about in bail release whether there's potential harm. And we talk a lot of times when we're making those arguments about the individual who is harmed. Is that person going to be harmed again if the person's released? But the law makes it clear that it talks about harm for everyone, not just the individual. So retribution is one factor the judge can consider. Another factor, Robert's touched on some of these, would be rehabilitation. Another factor is incapacitation. And the final factor is deterrence, which the studies have suggested have little impact on analysis. And most judges will say that that doesn't weigh too much in their decision because there just isn't much of a correlation between this person getting a jail sentence and this person not committing the same crime, thinking about that jail sentence. They're usually thinking about other things. So that's another way of organizing it in those ways. So retribution is about addressing the harm to the individual. Deterrence is talking both about the individual. Are we deterring the individual? Are we deterring a group in society? Incapacitation is society. In other words, we're protecting society by putting this person in a very controlled place, jail, prison. And rehabilitation is much more about the individual. I make arguments a lot that say, Judge, you know, this was drugs, this was alcohol, or this was mental health. And I make it really clear to the judge that I'm not saying that as an excuse. If it was an excuse, it could be a legal defense. But it rarely is, that it's that extreme. I'm telling the judge that because the next thing I want to tell the judge is what can we do about that? And as Robert says, that would address that issue, that would minimize that person hurting themselves and in that condition potentially hurting someone else. The only other point I want to make now so I don't talk too long is we heard from a lot of the introduction the word safety. Please, several things. None of us can be 100% safe. How did we all get here tonight? We got in a motor vehicle. More people are killed in the state by motor vehicle than any of the people I've represented. So you assume some amount of risk by getting in that car, a moment of inattention by you, a moment of inattention by someone else, something totally out of your control, mechanical, or throw alcohol or drugs into it, or a mental health situation and the person can't drive well. So we're willing to take risks in our daily life. And that's in part what the court does, is trying to balance those risks, because they don't lock everyone up as soon as they're arrested forever. So they have to balance that. The other thing is you see this often, is it's very easy for everyone to be happy when someone gets a big sentence or more sentence, or the law is made from a misdemeanor to a felony. In other words, a less serious crime generally to a more serious crime. It's hard for a court to sit there and look at our plea agreement and go, you know, that's just too much. I'm not going to approve that because that's just too much for what I know about this. Either tell me more or I'm going to work on that. So think of the societal pressure on the court to always generally want to give more because people don't understand the nuances of the particular situation. I can count on my hand, not using my thumb, not even using all my fingers, the number of times courts between Florida and here have just said, that's too much. I've heard more times than I can count, that's not enough. You know, think about that when you're looking at stuff on TV. You know, there are always extreme examples and outliers for both directions. But think in generally your reaction. How did that person who hurt those dogs, how come that isn't felonies? How come they're not getting life? Boy, what about the person that was killed next to the dog? I don't know. So I would just parse it the different way for you to look at it. And then let these folks tell you, you know, how they fit into those various parts, either for rehabilitation or for incapacitation or because like Robert, I don't know about how it fits into necessarily crime prevention other than the rehabilitation part. Because if you can help and correct the individual or give them some kind of hope or give them some kind of support, if that's their need, as opposed to something that can't be corrected, then you're more likely to have success in the end. The problem when you do that, ladies and gentlemen, is it's not going to, you give 10 people chances, not all of them are going to make it, and some of them are going to come back. Does that mean we don't give the other ones chances? That's the balancing act for us when we negotiate cases, but for the court when they make decisions, and even a little bit for DCF when they decide whether someone's, violated a rule a little bit and they're going to give them a graduated sanction, not send them to jail, try to work with them, or it's a bad enough sanction for some reason that they're going to file something in court and ask the judge to intervene. Thank you.
Well, if I could just jump in, I guess, at this point, we don't obviously control what the factors that go into the sentence, but what we hope happens is that the courts and the state's attorneys and the defense attorneys understand the value that restorative justice can play in the judicial process. So restorative justice is really about holding an individual who has harmed accountable to the community, to their victims, and to themselves to figure out what it is that they need to do in order to make things right, to learn from the mistake, to allow the victims to be healed, and how we can strengthen the communities. So the programs that we offer at CRJ all embed the philosophy of restorative justice into the work that we do. So when the courts decide, let's say they want to divert this case, and that's decided pre-arraignment, I think they're taking into consideration, the part of how can we hold this individual accountable while holding, allowing the victims' voices to be heard and allowing the communities to have a voice in the process. So court diversion isn't just an easy out or a slap on the wrist. It's actually a more intensive situation for an individual to have to really come to terms with how a victim has been harmed and how a community can be healed than maybe going to court, getting a fine, and being sent on their way. The process is really intensive, and we'd like to, I don't have the exact statistics, but the rate of recidivism is so much lower after a person has gone through this kind of restorative process. So, so court diversion is for juveniles and adults, and there's also another component, we call it treatment diversion. It's also, or better known as Tamarack, and this connects an individual that may have an underlying substance use or mental health condition. In addition to the restorative piece, they're also connected with a clinician so that the underlying issues can be addressed as well as the restorative piece. So those are a couple pre-arraignment programs that we offer. And then there's obviously other post-arraignment where we use restorative justice for somebody who may have that conviction, but there may be victims involved, and they also go through a restorative process as well on the other end of things. So that's just briefly, I know we'll get into it more in detail, the services, but I'd like to think Vermont is really a leader in the country as far as embracing restorative justice as an option for sentencing.
And as far as probation and parole is concerned with sentencing, we do write pre-sentence investigation reports and pre-plea reports as well. And we give our input on what should be done based on assessments that we do at our office and our knowledge of the person, and we do record checks and read affidavits and do interviews. And so we don't have a lot to say as far as sentencing goes. They usually come to us after that, but we do help a little bit before they are sentenced. And I'll have more to say about what we offer in my office when we get to that.
And really what we do is treatment. We have nothing really to say for sentencing. I think that at least the people sitting on this panel, and probably most of you in the audience, know that we're not going to arrest our way out of substance use disorder and the havoc that it wreaks on families. The one thing I want to say is I can't speak for the state of Vermont, but I can speak for the Bennington community and how well that these various agencies work together. And I believe that's the only way we're going to get any type of success working with individuals and the population that we're trying to serve. And not just those coming out of corrections, just those with substance use disorder. You know, the one thing I like about working with Gina down at corrections is they have that role. They know their role. You know, I don't have to be a hard ass, excuse my language. You know, I have to perform what I do. And we have to find a safe, supportive environment for these people that Gina and her people think should deserve a chance to do that. I've worked with everybody on this panel, not individually, but all their agencies, from the public defenders to the prosecutors, CRJ, UCS. You know, that's the only way we get anything done, because once again, we all have our different roles. And, you know, co-occurring disease, that's a term you hear a lot. You know, anybody with a substance use disorder also has mental illness. You know, and both those things have to be addressed. And that usually doesn't get done in a correctional facility. It has to be done, once again, in a supportive environment where they're going to be able to talk and speak and not feel judged and not feel worried about what they say may be used against them. But, you know, once again, you have to have a team. And we've had some very good data that has come out of the groups that we've been running at the probation and parole. But once again, it all starts with the relationship that we've been able to build with not just Gina, but her POs. In fact, I don't want to get into this right now, but even the POs go to a wellness class with us, you know, and they're open to that. You know, it's just amazing, you know, even with people with the roles where they have to do their job, they still are open to hearing about treatment and about what might work. And the other thing I want to say is everybody is an individual. You can't just generalize and say, well, if you used heroin, this is how you're going to be treated and this is what should be done. You know, you really have to do an individual's plan with that person so that they can be successful. You don't want to set people up for failure. Believe me, they've had enough. And if, once again, arresting and hollering and screaming and throwing them out of the house and all that stuff worked, we wouldn't continue to see the problems that we have in our community. As you can tell, I like to get on the soapbox a little bit, but this is really something that affects everybody. Substance use disorder is a disease, and I don't believe there's anybody probably sitting in this room that hasn't had it affect either friends or family. So it's something we need to continue to address and work together to get through.
I agree that it is a community problem and it is a community solution. Without all of you, we couldn't do anything. Without all of you in the audience, we couldn't be successful either. And it's a struggle for everybody. From a mental health point of view, we certainly have a role at times doing formal assessments and evaluations on whether somebody is competent to understand the charges and the actions that they took that brought them to jail or to court. And sometimes people are found incompetent by virtue either of their mental illness or their intellectual disabilities. That makes for a very difficult decision for the court process, because sometimes the expectation is that then it will all be taken care of by the mental health system, which it too is not well prepared for people who need to have linked consequences to their actions. So to be a little bit clearer, if you have an intellectual disability and in a fit of pique, you committed a violent act and someone was either hurt or killed, you might understand enough of the process to believe that it doesn't matter what you do, they will always let you go. And I've had clients tell me that. And exactly what you were talking about, the risk is that you cannot predict. While we have to look at each individual person, we can't predict based on an IQ, based on a diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or a level of intoxication and this number of years of an opioid dependence. We can't predict the that it's going to be 79% violence, or it's going to be 22% likely to reoffend. There is no way to predict. We can try to get the best sense, and unfortunately, or fortunately, and that's where CRJ has such lovely data, it's actually engaging in the treatment and rehabilitation that's the best predictor of people carrying that forward. And that's not unusual in that we're looking at an improvement in a pattern of habitual action. And so if we change our habits, we will have different outcomes. And it's very hard for us to change our habits. And it's something that everybody has to do. And when you're talking particularly substance use, you're talking about habits that get reinforced biologically and sociologically and psychologically. When you're talking about recurrent mental illnesses, there are changes in state in your mind, in how you are thinking and perceiving all of the data that's coming into you about whether things are good advice or bad advice, whether situations are safe or dangerous. And so it becomes hard in the throes of an exacerbation of an episode of mental illness to make a sound decision. And that's where developing a network of support of people you trust who can advise you is the safest predictor and helps you the most not to get into situations that will get into trouble with the courts. I think we all could talk on a lot, but I'll just stop there.
I think that's a great segue, actually, to the next item, which is really, and this is things that have come to us, to members of CPARB, when we do our listening sessions. There's a lot of complaints about how come they're letting him go? How come he's out in the community again? How come there's no jail or prison time? What's that all about? You're just letting them reoffend. Not me, but the courts are just letting them reoffend. What can we do about that? And so I'm hoping that you can address some of that concern, some of that process, just so that we can, as a community, we can understand more about that process and what happens in there. Is it because the person has a mental illness and that's why? Or is there some other issue? And that's part of the confusion that have been voiced to us. And we don't have the answers for that. So, and I don't know that you have the answers, but you have much more experience than certainly I do, or members of CPAR.
Well, I'll start this one. So there is, as much as the Constitution may be being challenged these days in various ways, it's where we start. I mean, there's a presumption of innocence. You're not guilty of something. You shouldn't be in jail unless special circumstances, waiting for your moment to prove your innocence or to be convicted, however you want to look at it, with certain narrow exceptions to that. And the narrow exceptions in Vermont, and they were the similar narrow exceptions when I came from Florida years and years ago, was crimes of violence are the felony crimes of violence, and in Vermont also crimes that potentially could be punished by life, not necessarily have to, but could be, and in some cases have to be. Those are the only ones that a special hearing can be held, and the presumption is to hold them, and the hearing has to show a reason to release them. But everyone else is not supposed to be waiting in jail. All the drug users, all the people who steal from your small business, all the people who panhandle on Main Street, all the people who take your cars and drive them and crash them in a quarry in New York. And I'm not trying to be blithe, but all of that other stuff, they're not supposed to wait in jail. And do we really want a society where everyone who's arrested just waits in jail? I don't think so. And there are factors, and maybe Robert jotted down the factors, but there's a whole series of factors like in sentencing that are supposed to guide a court as to whether a person can be released where it's allowed, and whether bail should be imposed, a monetary consequence, or actually Vermont allows you to put the title to your house, your car, another thing that's very rare, but it allows for that. for people who just don't have cash. That's why. Now, I think the frustration comes when you see the person who, okay, they're now banished from 12 stores in town because before the judge could get to sentencing, guilt or innocence, and then potentially sentencing, is they've shoplifted at every single store in town. Or they've been told that they can't go back, and they've been given a formal notice of trespass, and they still go back because there is only one Walmart. I don't think that there's an easy answer for that, other than trying to front-load services. I clearly encourage all my clients, if I perceive, and I'm not a doctor, but I've been doing it long enough that I have some insight, I encourage them, go to Turning Point, go to UCS. If not UCS, go to CRJ, because sometimes they can get that first call into somewhere that can jumpstart you. I don't want my people coming back. Don't get me wrong in my role here. I also, when I talk about it with people, I say, I don't want them to get hurt. I don't want them to hurt other people in either a violent sense or in a property sense. That's not good for me. I live in town too. So, but not everyone is ready for that. Maybe Ralph can talk about that. You need to have a certain amount of acknowledgement that I have something I need to deal with, and sometimes with mental health, that's hard. They don't even have that insight. So that at least addresses just briefly, and Robert can add to it, about the bail situation or the conditions of release that you see, as opposed to the sentencing issues where you see someone get on probation, they violate probation with a new case, they go back on probation. Well, when do they finally get to go to jail if they keep violating? And that's a more complicated situation. And the only thing I want to say from the doctors, when we're talking and you talk about percentages and things doing well and not, you really have to be mindful, I think I kind of said this in a different way, that we're not talking individuals when we're talking percentages.
No.
We're talking groups.
Populations.
And when I was saying before, you got 10 people, and maybe only 7 of them or 6 of them will be responsive to the treatment, well, those other ones aren't, and they'll come back. Or they're not ready, and they'll come back unless something happens. So you have to differentiate between the individual who did it wrong and that group of individuals that have a substance abuse problem but start doing treatment. And what's that success rate or failure rate?
So I will jump in, and a couple of things have gone through my mind as we answered the first question and the second question. The first was we have a very strong panel up here, and I thought this was a very good sort of bringing folks together, but that there's one group that's distinctly missing from this panel right now are the victims' advocates. And I realized just in talking here that most of what we were talking about is, what's good for the defendant. And so the role of the victim in a crime is perhaps one of the most important factors, not just in sentencing, but also in terms of, and we're talking about two aspects of this question here. We're talking about serious crimes, which we can debate what a serious crime might be, but pretrial, incarceration, and then sentencing. And frankly, I disagree with Frederick about what he had said about judges. The times that I've seen judges require a heftier sentence is only when the victims have spoken, or that it's such a clear harm to the victim that the sentence that the prosecutor and the defense might have come up with was clearly insufficient for that. Other times, we know what the judge will give. I don't want to say that we can predict what the judges ultimately give as a sentence, but when we argue the sentences, we get a sense of what we can expect the next time. And that informs our negotiations later on. And so in general, I think that there is pressure on judges, and there has been pressure on judges to have lighter sentences. I think that might be turning around, but that has been my experience perhaps for the past 12 years. And of course, all the judges are now going to come and confront me on that, but that's something that we have
rat you out.
we have factored in. But the real answer to, well, there are many, many answers, but in terms of a serious crime, having someone walk out, one factor that is not often talked about is quite literally the strength of the case. If the state has a case that is a very, very serious crime, but the investigation didn't unfold the way we would expect it to unfold, or it unfolded perfectly and just there isn't the amount of evidence there, then we have to make a decision on what we're going to do. Is this something where we're going to roll the dice at a trial, or are we going to get the conviction, get the supervision, and get something, whereas we might not get something before? And that's a very difficult decision for a prosecutor to make, because there are often times when we are almost certain that we're going to lose the trial, and we try it anyway because it's the right thing to do. And then there are other times when we think, we have a pretty good shot, but this isn't a slam dunk. And I've had cases, and I've seen cases where it's an open and shut case and not guilty verdicts came out. So a lot of this is balancing all of those different factors. And I do want to say a couple of things in terms, and I'm just focusing on the sentencing part of this for the most part, is someone might get a sentence that's a jail sentence. And then there are statutes that then cut that sentence in half that we don't know about, or you all don't know about. It might go into the factor of the negotiations, but someone gets a 2-year sentence to serve, but they get earned time, or they go to the work camp, and that'll be reduced to 1 year. And then the statutes have changed, and I'm brand new to the legislature, and I think I've done one that had anything to do with sentences, but then they'll change after the sentence has been imposed, and then there's now a 6-month window where they'll be released. Or that 6-month window is gone, but now they get a 1/4 of their sentence cut off just by being in jail, without necessarily having to actually behave. So a lot of these factors in sentencing are built into the statutes, and there had been that trend to reduce the incarcerated population, I'm saying over the past 10, 12 years or so. There's also, I know we're all talking a lot about sort of like the inside baseball of this, but sentences come in many forms. I'm just going to talk about one right now where it's a to-serve sentence. There has to be a minimum sentence. So let's say it's just 1 year. They have to be in jail 1 year. That might be cut down in some factors, but then they hit the 1-year mark, and they will be eligible for furlough, which is a decision by the Department of Corrections, or they'll be eligible for parole, which is a decision by the parole board. They might have a maximum sentence of, say, 10 years or something. But the Department of Corrections, and it's not our local department, it's, and actually, Gina, you can explain this a little bit more, but there are decisions that are made more towards the central office on whether folks are released prior to their maximum. And it's also the parole board that makes that decision as well. And we had seen a trend where we were quite surprised by many folks who had been released who were serving a sentence and committed another crime. And I don't want to talk about any specific cases, but I'll come up with a hypothetical. Say someone had committed a grand larceny at some point and they were in jail for 1 to 10 years, and then they were released, and then they committed another one. When I started the job, that person would not be released until the next crime was completely adjudicated. Now, that's not necessarily the case. And I had one defendant who was serving a sentence, committed 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, and 4th felonies, having been released and not having been held in jail. That wasn't our decision. That was a Department of Corrections decision, and I'm not blaming Gina for that, nor frankly the prior district manager. So there are some factors that are sort of Byzantine and not open to the public seeing them. And I'm going to flip over now to the pretrial release. And a lot of that is exactly as Frederick had said. Essentially in the 70s, there was really a change in understanding of what bail meant. And there was a Supreme Court decision that essentially made the right to bail in our Constitution not be something that could be overcome very easily at all, whereas before then it could. Someone had continued to commit crimes, then the right to bail might have been revoked, but then that changed, and there have been a couple of constitutional amendments since then to make it so that, yes, people that commit murders, people that commit rapes, people who have committed 4 felonies, they could be held in jail pending resolution. People that commit violent crimes, violent felonies only, they could be held in jail, and that's essentially it. Although I do want to say that the bail factors, and there are many of them, one of them includes violence as being a risk of flight from prosecution. So judges can use this. It's already built into the statute, and judges have not been in terms of bail decisions in the entire time that I've been practicing, so that's 18 years. So that's just a little bit in terms of my experience in seeing, and I'm not going to get into the definition of serious crimes because it could be broader, could be very small, but that's what I've experienced in our time. So yeah, I don't have to recap because I'm not actually in a summation or closing argument. So, but I do hope that when we get to questions, we'll have questions about this and hear from you folks about what it is that is your concerns on this.
But I told you, habits are hard to break, right? In terms of recap?
Yeah, that's true. And actually, Dr. Reeve brought up one other thing in terms of release for very, very serious crimes. When someone is not found competent and they then can't be tried, they're essentially in the custody of the Department of Mental Health. And the Department of Mental Health, as it's structured right now, does not consider public safety in terms of whether or not that person is still going to be in essentially a hospital for treatment. It's called an order of hospitalization is the technical term that would be issued for that. And quite frankly, that system, that statutory system, almost guarantees that many of these serious crimes where the person is incompetent is going to be released one way or the other without some really, really clever lawyering. And we've done that a number of times in our office. But the mental health system for very serious crimes is something that is non-functional right now. And this is me speaking as a state senator, just to be clear. I've seen what this happens and hoping that we'll have that discussion in Montpelier about how we can address that. And there's lots of factors that go into that. And I want to make sure that I'm not talking actually about UCS. This is not a local function at all. UCS has been fantastic. And one of the things that I wanted to say at the end, in terms of what factors go into sentencing, it's quite literally the collaboration of everyone here. We work so well together that we can find sentences for each case that none of them are ever perfect, but something that we think can function well without being either overly lenient or overly harsh.
I'd like to talk a little bit about violent crime and those that have been sentenced and are in my custody. If they are constantly getting into trouble and they return to jail, they may be case-staffed by Department of Corrections to do programming inside the facility. Of course, we have to prove that they violated their community supervision, and that's a process they've already discussed. It goes to court, and we have to prove that they violated. And then their probation, if it is probation, can be revoked, and they're sentenced to serve a sentence in jail. And then when they're close to their minimum, they can be looked at for programming or risk containment. And we make sure that they stay in and do what they need to do and have a solid case plan before they can be released into the community. Robert spoke about the parole board. They're a separate entity, and they do what they do. And even if we have a case staffing and we determine they're too violent to come out and they need to do programming before they come out, the parole board can parole them. So they could be out in the community even if Department of Corrections says we don't recommend them for parole. People 6 months before their minimum can be eligible for furlough, so that's presumptive parole. But we can look at their crimes. If they're violent, then we will have them do programming if it's appropriate. So we're working on public safety because that is a priority of the governor, and it's now mine. Of course, it always has been, but it's really a focus since April. So we're working on keeping the most violent criminals or people, from coming out into the community if they're not prepared to follow the rules or have the things in place to keep them and our community safe.
I think the other thing that's related to that is two factors. One is to realize that being in jail or prison, just like an inpatient unit that can have a locked door, is a very structured environment. And for people who are having a hard time organizing themselves, their thoughts and their behaviors, a structured environment is very organizing and is already a helpful thing. Now, there's also lots of stories of violence within those settings, which is not helpful, and lots of trauma. But when there is therapeutic intervention, when there is actually therapeutic programming, with or without medications and appropriate diagnoses, people come out often able to make use of an outpatient treatment setting that they were not able to use before.
Yes.
And they had a long enough period of sobriety and or treatment that they're able to value engaging.
We have
Go ahead.
MAT programs in the facilities to help with substance use disorder, and we also have what
You have to tell us what MAT means.
it's medically assisted treatment, Suboxone, and now I think we're going to start using methadone in some
Great.
cases. And so we have that in place for the incarcerated individuals. And then we also have Turning Point centers providing recovery coaching and groups, and there's AA and so on. So there's a lot we offer inside. And you're right, the organization, getting them out of the chaos, it can be helpful. It's not the best. You don't want to put people in jail. You don't have to, but in some cases it helps transition them back into the community and get help from Turning Point and CRJ and UCS.
No other comments on that one? Then let's move to that issue of resources and the roles you all play in really providing successful completion of sentencing. It's one thing, I mean, we don't have any judges here, we're not going to have any judges here, we don't want judges here. The issue is the impact on, in the end, the impact on the community. So I wonder if someone would like to start. Yeah, Gina.
This is where we probably can, I can talk a lot about. I don't know, can you guys hear me? Got to get closer, right.
It's too far away. that's
Sorry
all.
about that. Yeah, so Department of Corrections is relied upon to provide a lot of services, including housing and therapy and medical issues, and we provide a lot for people in our care and custody. And so in my office, we have Turning Point Center, we have CRJ, we have someone from UCS, we have PAVE, a space for PAVE, which is Project Against Violent Encounters. We provide a lot of services in my office so that we can remove barriers for people and they can be more successful. So as far as resources, I look to these folks here and anybody who will work with me to provide that for our supervised individuals. Money is always an issue. and we rely on federal funds a lot. So collaboration is helping us meet some needs and not rely so much on money outside of Vermont. Housing is a big issue, still is. We work with Pathways. They're not here right now, but we work with Pathways, and we have a few beds. I think we have 12 beds that we can utilize, and they're full except for one, and it's going to be full this weekend. We also have Recovery House. It's not a DOC housing option, but they do provide sober living for our individuals that work with Ralph. And so that partnership, having him in the office and having him provide groups for SUD folks and just being there has been helpful for my people that need housing, that also need sober housing especially. So we look for everybody to help out in this time. So.
And speaking for our residential program, the Paradise Recovery House, this isn't about renting rooms. This is about continuing your treatment if you want to be in recovery. There's several different things, starting with the application that they have to go through in order to become a member of our house. And we call it membership. We don't call it, it's not a landlord-tenant, it's a membership. And they are in a structured community. At Paradise Recovery House, we have staffing 24 hours. I have a live-in manager that's there overnight, and there's recovery coaching throughout the day and evenings at the house. There's requirements where they need to be involved with recovery-based programming in the community, whether they choose AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, Smart Recovery, whatever they might find. I have one gentleman that uses church, and it's been a great help for him, so that's okay too. They also all have individual recovery coaches that they meet with weekly in our program. And, it's a tight community. We have 2 4-bedroom units in our house, and, the structure is, not what they all want, but it's good, and it gives them a consistency in their life that probably some of them have never had. They need to be up at 8 o'clock in the morning, whether they're working or not. Their bed and room needs to be cleaned by 9 a.m. If somebody's working, we don't have anybody and haven't had anybody do a graveyard shift, but if somebody does, then of course we wouldn't get them out of bed at 8 in the morning. But, the one thing that I'm really proud of is the ability for our staff, along with the individuals that come to our program, everybody that's come in to the house has gotten employment in the Bennington community within a week. This is not a program that the state or federal government pays for. They pay for it. They pay $160 a week for the programming that we do there and for their essentials in the house. So, this is a good way, I believe, to build foundation for these guys that want to be in recovery. And once again, as some of the other panelists have said, they have to choose to do this. Nobody is sentenced to Paradise House. I wouldn't want to do that. I want those people to be able to come in and want to be there. We meet with every individual that comes into our program in person for the interview after the application is done, just so we can see eye to eye, see what they're about. And of course, if they're coming from corrections, we rely on the probation department to give us an input, which, I've got to say, everybody that's come in through the correctional system, there's always one person that doesn't think they should come, and there's always one that says, oh, yes, they've got to go. And then you have a lot of in between. And we work with that, and, sometimes they get a chance to come into the house, sometimes they don't. But, so far, we have 8 beds, and we have, I think it's 89%, if you like data, fulfilled. We're doing very well with that. And the other thing I want to say, as they talk about sentencing and the way you go through all that from, pre-trial and sentencing and afterwards, we also have, a format that we use with the people that we serve, too. Which we like to call the curriculum of care, which, first, they're either in corrections or in their inpatient rehab. That's their first step. Then they come to us sometimes in sober living. Sometimes they'll go to programs that are 3.1, which is a higher level of structure. There's still clinical supervision in those programs. It's a 90-day program usually before they come to sober living. And then they get to sober living. But treatment doesn't stop. You know, a lot of times I see people that are getting out of rehab after 15 or 21 days. Where do they go? They go back to where they used. They go back to where they drank. And sometimes that's family. You know, I tell people all the time when I work with the families that love is not going to stop somebody from taking a drink or using a drug, you know, and they don't understand that, nor should they if they don't have the issue themselves. But, you know, I look forward to continuing to grow our program. I'm hoping to have another house open at some point next year. And, you know, we'll keep rolling, you know, as long as we're able to.
I think it's impressive that people get a job so quickly when they get to your recovery house.
And that's the community, once again, open. I mean, these guys are honest, you know, about what they're doing. They say they have to say that they're at the Paradise Recovery House, that they're working on a substance use disorder. So everybody that gets hired, you know, the employer knows that.
Some of the things that we do to make sure that people can get a job is get their IDs to them. Some folks come to us and they don't know where their birth certificate is or how to get their non-driver ID. So we have people dedicated to getting that, and CRJ has been helpful with our folks too. So that's one more resource that we use. It may not seem like that's helping the community be safer, but it really is. If someone has a job, they're less likely to get into other troubles. So navigating how do you get your birth certificate? Some people don't know where to get their birth certificate, and it really helps when we get involved and get it for them, help them through the whole process.
So if I could, I guess, jump in here. We talked a bit before about court diversion, which is really pre-arraignment. And as Gina said, CRJ has a grant with the Department of Corrections to provide support post-incarceration. So we have a couple programs. One is called a reentry program, reentry navigation, where we have a full-time navigator who works very closely with her POs to connect people with the services that they need in the community. These are folks that are coming out on furlough, still under supervision, but need housing, need employment, need to get connected with services. So we have a full-time person ready to roll with folks in that capacity. We have a program called COSA, which stands for Circles of Support and Accountability. And what that is, it's an intensive year-long program where we have community volunteers trained in restorative justice, where they meet with an offender who has served a significant amount of time in a facility, who's now coming back into the community. So they become their new circle of support. And they meet weekly for a minimum of an hour a week for a minimum of a year to provide that new circle of support for individuals. We also have reentry educational opportunities. We do anger management, conflict resolution, life skills. So there is that component that we help provide for folks on that end of the spectrum. We talked about pretrial services. We also have a grant with the Attorney General's office where we can help folks pretrial, navigating, also connecting with services. If they need mental health supports, we can connect them with counselors, either at UCS or private counselors. They may not have health insurance, so we will help get them connected with health insurance. We do risk screenings, so if a full assessment isn't necessarily warranted at this time, we can do a screening. If it indicates there may be substance use or mental health issues, then we would refer them on for a full assessment. So we are involved, and it could come to us as a court order, or it could be a self-referral from an attorney that a person could benefit from that little extra help pre-trial. We talked a bit earlier about pre-arraignment, and these are the programs that are court diversion. So we're helping the system by keeping people out of the court system if their cases can be handled in a restorative way. And if they complete court diversion, and this is for juveniles and adults, their record is actually expunged. and they're given an opportunity to get a fresh start on life. And another new program that's really exciting, and it's just starting to really pick up steam, is called pre-charge. This is before a charge is even filed in the court system. Law enforcement, as well as the state's attorney, can get a case and say, you know what, we're going to give this individual an opportunity to repair the harm that they have caused, holding them accountable, but we're not going to charge them right yet. And if they successfully complete a restorative program, and which could mean anything from getting clinical help to repairing harm caused to paying restitution, apologies. It could range from all different things. Those charges are never filed with the courts. And again, it's keeping the backlog to a minimum and allowing the courts to really handle more significant cases. So that's just to touch on this topic. Those are some of the things that we offer there.
Rule of thumb, the further you get into the system, the more likely you are to come back. So if you can catch people early, the cases that are appropriate, before the charges. If you can catch them after the charges but before court. If you can catch them early in the court process. Even for people maybe who have been there 2 or 3 times on small stuff, it shouldn't be a one and done if they're still willing to go back or continue to address the reasons that caused them to be there. Getting people deep in the system should be reserved for special people. that meet all those criteria that Robert and I have talked about.
I was thinking about the fact that a couple of things. One of the things that I realized is that it's actually quite lucky for some people to commit a crime or to be picked up by the police and to start hitting your offices and having some accountability brought to their attention, and that they can begin to develop some insight. Because a lot of times there's so much anxiety in our society right now, so much pressure and social pressure. People are running from themselves, and they're running in any which way they can. And sometimes they run into being workaholics, and sometimes they run into numbing themselves from any pain. And it gets into lots of problems. It's very hard to get themselves out of that alone. And these structures actually force people to be aware and to make a choice to get some help. Our doors are open. We have a number of services that are 24/7, especially our crisis and our mobile crisis response. We have people embedded in both the Vermont State Police and Bennington Police Departments that have had some really great collaborative effects in working with law enforcement in solving what could be very contentious and unsafe interactions and having better outcomes. We do provide some therapy. We do provide a lot of skills coaching. We do provide care management. We provide services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including running 3 group homes 24/7. We have a transitional housing for people with serious mental illness. We have crisis stabilization, which is also open 24/7. And we also provide some psychiatric care. It's a drop in the bucket, frankly, for what the need of the community is. And it is underfunded, and not everybody comes who needs to come or should be able to come, partly because in the past we've had bureaucratic entry systems into our services. It makes it harder. We've worked a lot on making it more user-friendly. But the other thing we've done is we've found that there are a lot of community partners that we work well with, and that in providing services through the lifespan, we're working with community partners who are working with early childhood all the way up to elder care. And so part of what we're mostly focusing on here today, you're hearing conversation that applies to the adults. But in fact, we have seen many teenagers who've benefited from CRJ really turn their lives around. We've worked a lot with probation and parole, and Turning Point, and we are up all these places together. We do rounds at the hospital, we cross and send cases back and forth. They're our first source of referral for people who want to be involved in taking care of themselves in a sustainable way in terms of building community. A lot of what you're hearing, I think, is the different ways in which people have to learn how to rebuild a sense of social connection that is reciprocal, that allows them to be respected and to feel valued, to play a role in society. And when you feel like you don't matter and that nobody cares, it's easy to take advantage of other people and to feel like they deserve it. Nobody cares. What you learn through these programs and through paying attention in taking care of your substance use or your mental health disorder is that you do have value and you are a contributing person into this fabric we call society. And that is something that's sustaining and pulls people forward.
I suppose I'll talk too, and I just want to mention that at the beginning of the panel, I was joking with Letha that back in college, I'd get the question from the professor, and then I'd ignore the question and answer the question that I wanted to answer anyway. Letha pointed out that's what politicians do. But I just noticed a trend with this question. Pretty much everyone didn't answer the question. Because the question was about the services to get someone through sentencing. And really, one of the first questions I had when I started this job was, why are we the filter for social services? Why is it going through the state's attorney's office to make sure that the social services are given? And that seemed to be...
And the school too, Robert.
Well,
the school gets stuck with that a lot. Or...
Okay, steal my thunder, Fred.
Robert, I answered
I didn't know you were going there.
But, so there are a couple of things that I was going to, my track was lost by Frederick. This is how we are in court, by the way, and sometimes it works the other way around. So, but I think back in the 80s, probation and parole had like maybe 3 or 4 people working there. And how many are there now?
Oh, that's great. I'm in the middle of hiring, but I have 15 employees, yeah.
So, threefold since then. And we heard from all of these services about how much they can give to somebody, hopefully before they commit crimes, but outside of the criminal justice system. And each of these groups is fantastic, and each of these groups works well together. I mean, what if it were a situation where the resources were available, so Letha's group could see someone on the street that might obviously need some sort of services. They could reach out to Ralph, they could reach out to UCS and get them there before any of this happens. And essentially, what I'm pitching now, and also the schools can do it, and so that they don't have to have everything buried in the schools or everything located just at Department of Corrections, but it's out there for everybody. So essentially, this is my pitch for giving more resources to all of the social services in our community. Our community is very lucky to have the groups that we have, and unfortunately, and I've heard this over and over since starting as a senator, that Vermont prides itself on doing more with less, which I don't think we should take pride in that. I think we really should make sure that the people that are doing the work aren't overworked, and they have all the resources they need, and that includes the schools, includes all the social services folks here. So anyway, that's my pitch.
Any other thoughts? Then let's open it to questions from the community.
A ringer.
Hard questions.
You promised. You promised.
I actually had 3 questions. One of them is just percentages. So I'll look to Rob and Fred. How many cases actually go to trial? Any idea off the top of your head? So 1 in 100, 1 in 50, 1 in 25?
It's more like 1 in 100, but I don't know the actual statistics, but it's very few, very few. And the cases that do go to trial are the most serious cases, generally. And I think, Frederick, you might have more statistics, frankly, than I do.
Well, I was just thinking, there are 12 months in a year, and if we do, say, 3 trials a month, and sometimes we don't do that many, and then the last filing number I saw for criminal cases was almost 12,000.
1,200.
1,200. Excuse me, 1,200.
I'm like, we are serious trouble.
So in a calendar year.
I didn't put the zero in the
ballpark.
right place. So it's not many that actually go, and it generally is the ones that are serious enough that we're far apart, but also remember our roles are a little different. I don't plead my client guilty. He or she has to make that choice. So sometimes they just make a choice to go to trial regardless of advice, whether it's good or bad, or whether, they have a good shot, but the downside of losing is terrible because there's an offer on the table that maybe is trying to pick a middle ground to resolve it out of fairness, but without the risk of a trial for the defense. And Robert talked about the risk of trial for the state earlier.
But I do want to jump in on just one thing. A backlog had been mentioned. Bennington County essentially doesn't have a backlog.
Right.
Other parts of the state do. We've been pretty good at clearing our cases, despite the fact that the number of trials are relatively low.
We actually worked during the pandemic, except for trials.
Yeah.
To keep, dealing with the cases that came in. Now, a lot less came in, so there was less dealing, but we tried the ones, because the vast majority resolved some way short of trial. And the vast majority of those are probably some kind of plea agreement. Some percentage of them ultimately get dismissed for various reasons. Sometimes legal, sometimes assessment of the case, sometimes they've done a lot of intervention after the charges, and the state's willing to give them the benefit of the doubt when they assess their case. So it's not many that go to trial.
Thank you.
Ultimately.
There have been comments about probation, parole, and furlough. So is there a definition, 25 words or less, for what each of those means? And what kind of, if you will, consequences there are for each of those categories?
Consequences. Well,
Could you do that in 25 words?
no.
Yeah, most of these will be your definitions, Gene.
No, well, probation is a community sentence, and you don't go to jail. It's a suspended sentence, and let's say you get a DUI, and you guys work out a deal. The person gets probation, 3 to 6 months, all suspended, and then they get conditions of probation. They come to us, and they have to do counseling, and they have to get their license, and they can't drink. Those generic questions. And the consequences of violating those conditions may be going to court or getting a graduated sanction, talking to Ralph and getting into rehab if it was, drinking when you're not supposed to. And we'll use graduated sanctions, and maybe we'll go to court if they can't get it together. We'll bring a violation to court and add another condition. And so we do this, and there's a term date on there where the sentence maxes out after some time. They can get to that date and have all these conditions met and not further violate. They're done at their term. Parole is when you've been incarcerated, sentenced to incarceration, and then you're eligible at your minimum to see the parole board, and then they grant you parole if you've been a decent inmate, and then they impose conditions based on whatever the crime is that you have. If it's domestic violence, you'll get a bunch of specialized conditions for domestic violence, like you'll attend domestic abuse education programming or caring dads, stay away from certain people, and so on. So they give you all these conditions to make sure that the community is safe, your victim is safe, and that you're engaging in rehabilitative activities. Furlough is that you haven't been paroled, and at your minimum, you're eligible to come out. And if we're not, like I mentioned earlier, if I'm not making you do programming to address some risks that we see, you can come out into the community and stay on furlough until you accomplish some things in the community, like get a job, maintain stable housing, stay out of trouble. Then you can be paroled from the community. Anyway, did that answer some of what you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. That wasn't 25 words or less, sorry.
You did good.
The last question I had, and Ralph made a reference to this, and I think Dr. Reed did also. What's the biggest need? What service isn't there?
Housing.
That needs to be there?
Housing.
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 You referenced that. Is that?
Talk about social determinants of health. Housing is one of the major sources of insecurity. And then closely related to it these days is food and employment.
Anything else from anybody else that's different from housing and food?
Well, it's housing and food, but there's navigation too to find what you need to get for yourself.
Yeah.
So, finding a job.
It gets bigger, but
Yeah.
you said,
Yeah.
what's the one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, if I had to pick one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
I'm Jamie Jenkins, and I'm sort of following up on Rob's comment about you guys didn't answer the questions, but I loved what you did, and I think
I
the conversation was really rich, and I really enjoyed the direction that you took it in. And then I think the follow-up on Charlie's sort of line of questioning, one of the purposes of the forum, and we're supposed to evaluate you on it, is a sentence that says, improve understanding of why offenders of serious crimes are often released without any jail or prison time. And so my question is, are there percentages, is that, it's not a value neutral statement, so one, is it accurate, and can you expand on that?
I guess I'll start with that. And this is sort of why I dodged answering what a serious crime would be. I would say, and there's also a definition of what prison time or jail time would be. I would say for a lot of the most serious crimes, there's always some jail time, and that might be up front when they're first arrested and held until trial or plea agreement usually. And the only answer to that is, if we're going to answer just the question broadly, why no jail time for what someone sees as a serious crime? It's one of two things. One, we couldn't prove the case, or they got a supervisory sentence. So they're on probation. They might be automatically on furlough. We can't sentence people to parole, but there would be some form of underlying sentence that they could potentially serve if they didn't follow the rules that they're supposed to follow.
Let me try the different
Or
one.
they're acquitted in trial.
Most of my clients don't worry about fines except maybe in unusual circumstances and maybe DUIs. So when I talk to a client about it, and I'm talking the nuts and bolts of working something out, I say, okay, well, let me just give you an example. 1 to 3 years. The question for the judge is, does the judge want you to serve all of it, part of it, or none of it? So 1 to 3 years, all suspended with some term of community supervision, which is almost always probation. There are conditions for that, but that, as I explained to my clients, is the anvil. Remember those Roadrunner cartoons I tell them? That's hanging over the coyote's head, you're the coyote. If you fail to follow the conditions of probation and the judge gets sufficiently annoyed that this is not appropriate for you, you've bargained for 1 to 3 years in jail. The next one is serve part of it. 1 to 3 years, split to serve anything off the minimum. Although I looked at the statute, Robert, I think you actually can go above the minimum, but We traditionally don't split higher than the minimum. So 1 to 3 years, split to serve 6 months in jail, then you get a chance on probation. So there's that punishment, bad. You did something bad before we're going to try to work with you other than the program, the few programs that may be in jail. And then finally, 1 to 3 years. You go to jail for 1 to 3 years. You're eligible to be released at 1. It's between you and corrections when you get out, and they can keep you there for 3 years subject to any credit you already have because you may have waited in jail for that. So that jail, as Robert said, is always there in one form. But I tell my client, if you do probation perfectly, you'll never see that 1 to 3. You're going to see that 1 year of supervision or that 2 years of supervision on probation. And that's what we want. We're hoping that that will be some kind of hidden incentive. I also just wanted to throw something else, because I think I was maybe a little blithe earlier about like petty larcenies and stuff. You know, serious crime, look at it this way. That small business owner on Main Street who keeps her bag of money under the table, and that's her change for doing her business, and it gets taken. Well, that small business person maybe, you know, the margin may be very small. That's very serious to them. Some of those people come into court and they're really upset. And, you know, I'm not going to belittle them as a defense attorney of the person who's now just pled guilty, you know, to taking this. And probably, as my grandfather would say, it's like getting blood from a turnip that restitution will ever be paid. Or blood from a stone. You know, that's another old-fashioned saying, meaning they're never going to be able to pay it back because they're never going to have the ability, likely, to pay that $750 back, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. So those are serious crimes for some people, but are those crimes that we want to put people in jail for when we parse it at the end of the day? A lot less likely that than someone who hit someone with a bat and put him to the hospital for a week for no good reason other than they saw them doing something on their phone that they didn't like. So I would agree with Robert. The more serious the felony crime, or if there's a little bit of history of felony crime, there's usually some amount of jail associated with it. That's not suspended, necessarily.
And then even if it slips by you guys, a 0 to 10-year sentence to incarceration may come to my office from court to be put on furlough, and I will see that they need to go into the jail, even though they had the expectation they would be serving on furlough. So sometimes
that was Jeffrey.
No, I've had others too. So serious crimes like domestic violence or so on. So I would say you need a residence, you need all these things, you need to do programming, and then I'd put them in. And then they would be angry. Not the community, but the individual and your staff may be angry that I didn't leave them out in the community to, you know, serve their sentence. They had things they had to do to make their lives better and also keep the community safer. So sometimes the 0 minute is the other way. People, they get to go to jail, even though no one thought they were going to from the court.
And if you've gotten anything out of this, there's a lot of moving pieces to sentences. What they get and how they can get it. What are the parameters? It's more than just whatever the statutory maximum is for the particular crime. Will they serve it in the community? Will they start with just maybe a rep board referral, which would take them to Letha? Would they get a mental health referral that might take them to UCS? Or they don't know where to go, or UCS doesn't seem to return their phone calls for some reason. So what we need is a navigator, maybe that's Turning Point, to put that first call in and go, hey, we got someone here we're working with, and they got some mild health, you know, what can I tell them? You know, so now that you're getting it from the horse's mouth, you're helping that person, you're giving them some confidence to go sit up and wait for that screening that might not happen for a few hours, but if you wait long enough, someone's going to get to you and at least do an initial screening, and then we'll figure out about getting you a counselor. And then, what if they're in jail? Then there's programming, there's potential stuff there. So we're all in it, and just because of the last comment, we don't always, there's all these different rules. And there are rules about sending people down with zero minimums. Well, that may have just changed. There may be a new administrative policy. It may be an interpretation. It may be left open to more than interpretation than we knew. But we still all work together, even in that case. So.
Yeah, and I think that there's another piece to this that is an extra wrinkle when we're talking about a mental health disorder. Sometimes it's not as much of a problem with substance use, but certainly with mental health disorders is under certain duress, people will comply with taking some medications or recommended treatment, but they don't see it making a difference, or it's made a difference, they feel like themselves, so they don't see the need for it. It's not like, when you actually drink something like alcohol or take an opioid, you can tell that you're taking this substance. When you take medications for mental health disorders, what you feel the most are the side effects. When the medicine is working well, you are functioning, your brain is functioning better. You can't tell by a feeling, you can notice by your function. Do you see the difference? And it sometimes...
I have clients, and it's like, I tell them, don't stop, talk to your doctor first.
Right.
Because they take the medicine, they feel better,
Bingo.
I'm cured, I don't need the medicine anymore. And they're cycled back down again.
Right, and we see this...
And I have a chance of seeing them again.
Right, and so that then contributes to people seemingly to be on the right track, and then it's hard to keep track of them. So they don't charge their phone, they don't answer their phone calls, they have filled up their voicemail so that you can't leave a message, they don't have an address. So how do you actually reach them? And that lends more of a gray zone of who's responsible at that point. And that is not helpful either. So I think that plays a role in there as well. And the other thing that Rob mentioned is that in mental health, the criteria for hospitalization, the criteria for dangerousness is, except when you have identified a specific target, it's not really the mental health purview of diagnosis is what amount of damage you might be doing to society until it becomes really obvious you're harming yourself or harming people around you. But other than that, you can kind of go off and do what you want from a mental health point of view. And that leads in people who are not respectful of others. And that's why I had talked before about the whole sort of learning how to be in a society and how to value being in a society. That piece, when that is gone, being in a society becomes an irrelevant consideration for a person with that kind of a disorder. That is very hard without a firm rule, regulation, walls, et cetera, to reinforce how you have to follow rules with other people. And we don't have laws that really enforce that until you get to the very, very end.
Very extreme. The
very extreme. And so, for example, we have people, we're not really talking about those conditions, but we have people who are on orders of non-hospitalization, which is forced medication to continue to take it. But if they decide that they feel better and don't need it, it takes 3 to 6 months when you tell the courts that they're not showing up for treatment for that process to go through to get them that. Meanwhile, they've decompensated. Right. So as we protect our individual rights, we also create slow processes that slow the responsiveness sometimes. That's all I'm saying. It's a work in progress, and we all have to keep our doors open and keep hearing from each other. We can't operate in isolation. It really doesn't work. I'm sorry, you had a question back. Do you want to come to the microphone? Go.
Good evening, Kelly Carroll, Bennington, Voices for Vermont Victims. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here. I know that there's a lot of collaboration that goes on behind the scenes in our community between Project Alliance, BenStat, the Situation Table, and so I thank all of you for that because there is a lot, and I think that these forums, so thank you, are good for showing people that there is a lot of collaboration and a lot going on behind the scenes. I'm very happy to hear that Paradise is open, and that hopefully the community is accepting it. I live in the neighborhood, so welcome to the neighborhood. And I really hope that it's a success and can expand to other residences around, because really to think that somebody can go away to rehab for 14, 21, 28 days and then come back and see a change is really naive and ineffective. I think personally, just my opinion. So I do want to thank all of you for being here. I just wanted to make a couple of comments and ask a couple of questions. As most of you may or may not know, my daughter Emily Hammond was murdered by an individual who's now refusing to comply with court-ordered evaluations. And like many families in Vermont, I think it's great that you're saying we don't have a backlog here in court cases, but we're waiting years to go through that process. We're almost to the 5-year mark. Thank you for mentioning something about having a victim's advocate. And the importance of that, because we watch the system just kind of stall, and victims get sidelined between sentencing and release decisions and mental health services. And these defenses have a real lasting impact on families and communities because there is trauma with them. And if you can get them, people in the beginning and do restorative so that they're not repeats for Mr. Bragdon, that ideally is the goal. Thank you for mentioning that the Department of Mental Health does not have any public safety mandate. They should have. I hope that the legislature will do something about that, but I'm not optimistic that will happen in my lifetime. And I think that it was really good to hear that judges are open to hearing from victims. I know if you go into a criminal court case and you do go through the process to sentencing, victims are allowed to make an impact statement. However, in mental health related criminal cases, they're usually sent over when you get through the hospitalization and all that. They go into family court, and victims don't have a voice. Victims only have the ability to write a letter to a judge who may or may not even read it, and it certainly will not be taken into consideration for that. So it was good to hear, because I'll certainly keep writing judges. But my question is, what safeguards are in place to prevent individuals who are charged with serious offenses, especially mental health, from avoiding prison through either questionable or unsubstantiated mental health or competency-based offenses? And Rob, this part's for you. Given that Vermont still lacks, I'm sorry, Senator Plunkett, this part is for you.
I prefer Rob.
Given that Vermont still lacks both a forensic psychiatric facility and competency restoration process, will you support legislation to address these gaps in the upcoming session?
So to answer that question, yes. And the other question is more difficult to answer because essentially in the end the judge is making a decision that they find is supported by a report from some psychiatrist. So I wouldn't say the only safeguards are the adversarial system of the two sides and the judge making a decision on what's presented to them.
But what about when somebody's just refusing to comply? Is there any point in time where that refusal becomes maybe like a threat to due process, community safety, or just like an obstruction of justice?
I can answer that one,
Okay.
I think. Competency and sanity, those are the two terms that deal with mental health in the criminal justice system. Competency is a here and now question. Right now, is this person competent today, at this moment in time? Sanity is a then and there question. At the time of the incident, was the person insane as defined by law? They could have been sane 5 minutes before, they could have been sane 5 minutes after, but if it's proven that at the instant the crime happens they weren't, then that's a defense. So, for competency, the law believes that it is not right for a person that cannot participate in their defense, sometimes not know what's going on, sometimes living in an alternate reality, is asked to participate in their defense to defend themselves. So the case will never go forward until, if competency has been properly raised, until it's been resolved. Sanity is very different, ladies and gentlemen. If the defense comes forward, the way it has to be done now, the defense has to come forward with a report or support for an insanity defense, and then the court orders that the state doctor a state may have a doctor look at them. If a person refuses at that point in time, they're competent, but now we're trying to determine that then and there at the time of the crime were they sane. They participated with a defense doctor who opines that this person wasn't sane at the time. State now has a right to a doctor. If they don't participate with the doctor's report, defense is gone.
Okay.
So for competency, it really could wait. And sometimes, not getting into the nuances here between us, but sometimes that person for a competency evaluation is in the community, sometimes they're in jail. If they're in jail, ladies and gentlemen, they're just going to sit there forever until they finish the competency report. On the sanity, if they don't participate in the second half, and it can't be redone somehow within a reasonable period of time, then you're forfeiting the ability to use that defense, and you have whatever other defense might remain, if any. So that's the difference between the two, and that's why with one we wait, and the other one, yeah, that kind of behavior could foreclose that defense being available to that person.
Okay. And if someone is found guilty by reason of insanity, is there some place to house them other than a nursing home?
No, it's the same thing that, Robert talked about and you brought up. There isn't a deep forensic hospital, although there are some forensic beds. Liz Teague, famous in our community for her criminal, and then found, not guilty by reason of insanity behavior. That person was held for a long time, but that person was at the extreme end of an assessment of dangerousness by mental health.
Okay.
So are there places? There are a few, but that person would have to be that extreme as Ms. Teague had been found for years to be. And I know that when I first came here in I think 97, they were litigating then about trying to get her to less restrictive places, and it never went anywhere for the longest time.
Right. So, okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Well, it's along these issues. That case is very near and dear to me because I had that young man in school. What did we miss? He was quiet. That's why we missed it. And now I have just talked to another mother with this, hopefully it's not the same thing, but it is this incompetency to stand trial. She knows what's going to happen. He will be found incompetent to stand trial. He will go somewhere and he will be released. It just happens over and over again. And she is so worn out from this pattern of maybe 18 years is there any, you talked a little bit about, Rob, is there any solution to the mentally ill being found incompetent to stand trial and then being released within 6 weeks with nowhere to go? And you can't go home because their parent is too worn out. They can't do it anymore.
In our
Thank
current
you.
system, there is not. There is no solution in the current system.
And I mean,
And that's part of
Yeah.
the housing need. And that's one form of housing that is needed. It's on the spectrum. It's not just having an apartment someplace, but the level of supports from the forensic need, long-term, to treatment needs, because that person is presumed capable of participating in some kind of mental health treatment that by your description, they're not interested in. And so they're not going to have any real safety net. And if the court cannot, through society, doesn't use the court system to put some kind of container, the person is free to participate however. That is the weakness of our system.
the balance, and I'd like to see that there would be potentially some definite forensic beds, because, well, that's a different story. I'd like to see some of that. Now that made me forget, but, the balancing test. It's liberty. That's what our whole country is built on. That doesn't mean that you should be free to hurt people, but we're very concerned with putting impediments on people's liberty because we don't like how they're eclectic. Well, I don't want to see my client, remember, I represent individuals, not groups. I don't want to see my client get hurt, and I sure as hell don't want to see my client hurt someone else. So I'd like there to be something for them more than a 90-day order for some of my clients that the court finds after either a contested hearing or by agreement that that's appropriate. I mean, I don't make a judgment for, oh, you need to go to the hospital, you're going to go to the hospital, you know. And the way it is now, once the person is found either incompetent or insane, I'm not their lawyer. It's now legal aid. Okay, this is a personal opinion, personal professional opinion. I don't like that. Because their motives are different than mine about making sure my client is taken care of in a way that also protects his criminal interests, which they're not so worried about. They're more worried just about the liberty interests. But it's a balance of liberty. It's the same reason why we make it difficult to hold many people before they're found guilty, like on bail or conditions. It's that same liberty desire we have, and we make these very narrow restrictions. You have to be extremely mentally ill. The way I explain it informally, and I hope that this isn't too flip, is unless my client is sitting there, you know, with a blindfold on, field stripping his M16, loading it up, and muttering under his breath how he's going to kill everyone, they won't take him off the streets.
And to expound on
That's the balance.
my answer, and to perhaps be a little more sensitive to that, I don't think it's a liberty issue at all. I think we have a mental health system in general that allows each aspect of that system to simply wash their hands and push it on to the next. And it ultimately is the families that suffer. And more importantly, it's an utter failure to provide the medical treatment that these folks need. And it's harming families and it's harming our society. And I don't think it's because we honor a liberty interest. I think that there isn't the will to do it. And the will to do it from folks that we necessarily expect. And again, I want to make sure I'm clear on this. I'm speaking generally, and because I know a lot of this sounds like it would be directly towards UCS, but the folks I've worked with at UCS are absolutely fabulous. I've seen your mental crisis team. They've worked wonders. They've worked wonders. But beyond that, it's a failure to take care of some of the most vulnerable members of our society, and it's sad. And I think you can hear that in my voice.
Other questions? Oh, you're good? Oh, Scott, sure.
Scott Frost from Bennington. I'd like to commend the programs you guys have set up. I think it's amazing. I'm curious, are there statistics for the reoffender rate for our program in Vermont?
I can't directly answer that because I have not seen those statistics. What I can tell you is that there may be 3 or 4 or 5 different definitions of recidivism, none of which are satisfactory to me. One is a definition of someone who has committed a new offense and gone to jail within a year. And that does not really encapsulate the recidivism rate. Gina might have a better sense of what you guys have, and I don't, Frederick, do you guys get statistics on that? We don't.
We get it, but that's the same kind of thing. Recidivism is defined by, say, not getting in trouble for a year after you've done the program, or not getting in trouble for 2 or 3 years. And what I don't understand to be able to balance and help you, find that is, well, what would be the recidivism rate without that program? Does that mean instead of, not having a recidivating, whatever it is, in 5 years, that they would do it in a year? So then, we're helping this person for another 4 years, and we're helping society by them not getting in trouble for that additional 4 years. I just don't know, but maybe Gina knows some of that.
Well, I don't have numbers, and I'm sorry I didn't come here prepared with that. I should have been able to give you those, but with COVID pandemic, it affected some of our numbers, and so I'm not sure we even have up-to-date stats right now, but I'll bring that to you, give it to you guys, and let you know.
We are filling up the jail cell again.
No, we're not. Stop.
Since COVID. And there's all sorts of different reasons, both good and bad, and reasons why they weren't as full then, which have nothing to do with the crimes that were being committed or things like that. But, and I don't know what that is. I just know that it's trending back up again now that we're past COVID.
I know that we have good results with our risk intervention services in jail. So we're having some good results, and we wouldn't use those things if they weren't working. So we're evidence-based, and we like data. Me, not personally, but there are people that do that, and we use programs that are effective. So there's some good data. There has to be, or we wouldn't use it. And I'll get those numbers to you, though. I will. I'll share.
And Mr. Plunkett, with the with not having a juvenile facility and the juvenile age being pushed up so high, what can be done about the people that come to sell drugs and have violent crimes, and then they're minors, so they get sent back home, and then they're back the next week selling drugs again?
And you're specifically talking about juveniles here?
Yeah, but I mean, violent juveniles, like 21 is considered a minor still, right? And
no.
Youthful offender.
Is what?
Yeah.
A youthful offender.
Yeah.
A youthful offender? Youthful offender.
Yeah, but is that less than?
The age limit is pushed from 18 to 19, but as that middle ground between straight family court and straight criminal court of youthful offender court jurisdiction goes to 22. And just so you understand, it's not forever necessarily in YO. Most people will get a form of community supervision. If they ultimately don't perform to the court's satisfaction, whatever they admitted in family court goes to criminal court for open sentencing. So let's say they hit someone with a bat, and they plead guilty to an aggravated assault, and they get youthful offender probation at 20. So we got 2 years of supervision, which would be a relatively not an unusual period of time for community supervision. If they violate that, they go back, they face 15 years. They might not just get 15 years, but that's what's hanging over their head. So I haven't seen a lot of out-of-staters that are 16, 17, 18, 19, or 20 that have come through our family court and then come back again.
Well,
in adult court, maybe some more, so they're a little bit older.
To answer
conference, that was a big issue.
Yeah, to answer your question, Scott, so just after and during COVID, we had a lot of juveniles come up here who were drug dealers, and they were violent. And the way our office handled it was we charged every one of them that we could with the violent crimes and kept them in criminal court. And I think maybe 1 or 2 of them went through the process that Frederick had just talked about and stayed in juvenile court.
Yeah, not a lot.
But not a lot. Most of them, the juvenile court, I can't talk about juvenile court, but I can tell you that you can see that 16-year-olds were back in criminal court. Many of them, they spent some time in jail, and we put them on probation specifically so that they go back to their communities. And contrary to what Fred just said, many of them did reviolate. Many of them spent time in jail in Massachusetts, of the folks that I can recall. And some of them come back here, serve some time here. And so what our office had done was to treat them in the criminal court as much as possible. And also during that time, there was a legislative change to make one other crime something that could automatically be charged in adult court, so it wouldn't automatically be shoved into juvenile court. So the way it was handled was using all of the tools that the Bennington County State's Attorney's Office could, and also pulling some legislative levers before my time there that made it so that there are these tools to deal with that type of situation again. What I can say, though, is that situation was unique. I think it happened at a point in time, and we have not seen it resurface in the past, I want to say, I don't want to guess the number of years, but we felt like that has not a great concern as much as it was back at the time. And quite frankly, our local law enforcement, working with a federal partner, did an amazing job in handling those folks during that period of time. It seemed to have taken a long time, but it was something that was quite amazing to see, even though I know that time, reading in the paper about shootings, about murders, was quite terrifying. We can say that is not something that we see on our radar now.
And that explanation is why I didn't see so many in family court.
Yeah. I do think that...
I'm mostly in family court these days. I carry related family cases that are in criminal, and I have some major cases.
Yeah, and I will say we were talking today about one of those folks, and one of them has not reoffended as far as we know. So we have not seen them back. So I forget how many there were. I don't think there were a dozen, but one of them maybe worked out. I've stopped accounting success stories, because my success stories over the years ultimately become tragedies in the end. So I don't want to call it a success story.
Well, we were over time, so yeah.
I just have one more comment. What do you guys think about devoting more psychiatric and rehab efforts to prisons, so when people go there, they get the medical treatment and the rehab?
Always worthwhile, and any effort to work towards rehabilitation is money and effort well spent. Most people the percentage who are just purely antisocial and not going to repair is very, very, very small. Almost everybody else has either a huge problem, a social problem that seemed insolvable at the time, and mostly have a history of personal trauma, sexual, physical, sexual, emotional abuse in their developmental years, and it carries through when it hasn't been treated. And so providing treatment and rehabilitation, we know that as people get older, their ability to make use of that, and I mean when they go into their third and fourth decades, their ability to make use of treatment is very different with that more mature brain, and it's less impulsive. And so it's all money well spent and is cost effective.
And I can answer your question in 15 seconds with a quick story. Husband and wife I knew in Florida, he did capital work, death penalty sentencing work. She was a school teacher. And they were arguing, and he was basically saying, you know, my job, it's like the priesthood, I'm trying to save this guy's life and all of that. And she shut him up by saying, well, if you gave me more stuff, you wouldn't have the client to begin with.
Yeah, that's
So if you do the mental health, you do the education, you do the substance abuse, you're going to have a lot smaller population at the other end of the tunnel or the tube or whatever you want to look at it. Which is what the doctor's saying too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
I want to
everybody.
thank our panelists. We really appreciate, we really appreciate your willingness to really dance with these purposes, with these questions, because they were created by people who are not in the system. We aren't composers, we aren't musicians. And so they are mushy in a sense, but that's not, so difficult to dance with. So I appreciate that. I also want to thank you for coming to the forum. Really important content. Please complete the evaluations. They aren't an evaluation of the panelists. They are an evaluation of the event as a whole, and an assessment really of what you've learned and how we can better improve what we're doing as a board for the town. So thank you for that. And finally, if you're at all interested in a listening session, please look at our page on the town's website and put a suggestion there, and someone will contact you if you would like to have a listening session with us. All right, thank you very, very much, and enjoy your evening.